Attention. Don't stop eating. Just stop talking. The wait staff will serve dessert. We'll just keep going. We've got time. Helen wants a little extra for question and answers, but I was happy to be able to introduce her. I think a lot of Helen, we've spent some time together in Africa, not in the bush, but in Africa with congressional delegations, and will again soon, I hope. Johnny wanted me to talk a little bit about our role in the CBFP. If you are National Geographic followers, you may have seen some of the many articles over the years about Dr. Michael Fay. Mike is a real character. Started in the Congo with Dr. Ruggiero from Fish and Wildlife that Johnny introduced. They were Peace Corps workers together. Just after the Great War. When was it, literally? It was in the mid-'70s, right? 1981. 81. 30 years ago. They're a lot older than I am. Mike has been on the payroll of Wildlife Conservation Society for a long time. And this was one of his great dreams. And it was sponsored by WCS, but also National Geographic Society, for which Mike still serves as an explorer in residence. But he walked some 2,000 miles over 15 months through mostly Congo and Gabon with a team of pygmies. Actually, it was two teams of pygmies because he wore one of the teams out and they had to replace them with a new team. Mike doesn't wear out very easily. I might mention, by the way, he wore one pair of Patagonia shorts. This is a paid political announcement. Patagonia's a supporter of ours. He wore one pair of Patagonia shorts and wore out two pair of Tevas before he discovered Chacos. And that's all. I mean, he went semi-naked for 2,000 miles over 15 months through the Congo. And he did a Lewis and Clark type expedition. By the way, Richard, I have the Lewis and Clark book in my house with about 200 little yellow stickies in it, where he planned the trip, literally. He ran a biodegradable red tape the entire way. He took a GPS reading every 20 seconds. He filmed an average of about 8 hours of video a day. He filled up 37 handwritten journals, like accountant's journals, in addition to his electronic media. He filled up a blog for a geographic website every night. He collected on 10 meters either side of the path for the whole 2,000 miles, leaves and insects and droppings, dung and other specimens, which he filled bags with. And every 3 to 5 weeks, Toma, his advance guy, would show up and deliver batteries and flour and canned fish and oil and other things, and collect the specimens. 66,000 batteries, by the way. This vast amount of data, which took them about a year and a half at Geographic, a team of 7 people, just to catalog. They said it would take 100 years to actually digest it. But on that trip, Mike came out realizing that much of this part of Africa had never been seen by humans. You think, oh, well, Africans had seen it. Africans hadn't seen it for over 100 years because the French moved everybody out of the forest closer to the road so they could tax them and control them. And so they literally depopulated the forest. Vast wildlife. His dream was, of course, before it was overexploited, to set up some sort of long-term land use management plan where a lot of it would be preserved, but then where there would be a plan for utilization as well. So out of this was born 6 nations, 11 landscapes, dozens of corporations and NGOs that are now partners in the Congo Basin Forest Partnership. You'll hear CARPE used today. I'll let somebody else explain to you what CARPE is. I'm still not quite sure what the hell it is. But CARPE is a vehicle by which this plan is implemented that involves a lot of our partners. Mike went to WCS, WWF, CI, and said, we have an opportunity to set up a series of parks and protected areas, but we need help to do it. Those three NGOs committed, I think, about $36 million over a period of 10 years, if the U.S. government would come in and match it. It was a hard sell, but long story short, with Mike as our best salesman, we got a team of members together, some of our NGO partners, some agency heads. I know Pete Seligman was there. I know that Elliot Engel was there. I know that Bill Archer and Clay Shaw, John Tanner were there. Our Democrat friends loved the venue because we couldn't find a room anywhere but at the Republican National Club. So Geographic did an article on it later, said it was something like lousy food but good company or something, I don't know. But there was plenty of wine. So people were testifying. And I stood at the door and I didn't let anybody leave unless they shook my hand and said, yes, we'll help. And not soon after that, we had taken some members, by the way. We had taken some of those I mentioned, but also Hal Rogers and Sonny Callahan. God, I can't remember who went in the Congo right now, but they gave a push. Ultimately, we got Colin Powell to agree to stop. This is an interesting aside. Colin Powell was in Johannesburg at the World Summit on Sustainable Development, and 30 days before he arrived in Gabon, the ambassador of Angola asked him where he was going to stop in the continent, and he said Gabon. And the ambassador said, there was the Pakistani ambassador, he said he was going to get Angola and Gabon. He said, why in the hell are you going to Gabon? And Powell said, I don't know. John and Walter had me going. Those were his two assistant secretaries for Africa and OES. 30 days before he got to Gabon, Colin Powell wasn't sure why he was going to Gabon. He also didn't see the correlation between conservation and U.S. foreign policy. There was a small dinner the night he left, the only night he was there, and when that dinner was over, he said, I am now a conservationist for Africa for life. And when he retired, he gave several speeches, some of which we have, and I saw him testify before the House Foreign Affairs Committee, where he said that the three stools of U.S. foreign policy rested on democracy, good governance, on economic development, people having livelihoods, using their natural resources, and managing their resources wisely so that they could utilize them for future generations. This is why the CBFP was born. There's over 100 million acres now in the wider protected areas. There are some 12 or 15 million, I don't know, Allard and some of the experts have the numbers. Helen might talk about some of them today, but millions of acres that are actually in timber leases so that they are sustainably managed, so that the timber industry is alive, it's healthy. Some 5,000 professional game rangers have been trained in these 11 landscapes in 6 countries. It's been a tremendous success. It's not perfect, but it continues, and it continues to improve. And the United States was very much part of launching this. It's a signature project for us, and as John said, that collaboration by members of Congress resulted in the birth of the International Conservation Caucus. The members that were involved in that initially said, if we can do things like this, why can't we do them in other places as well? And it's another subject, but the vision was to have corridor landscapes around the world. And at one point the big NGOs had designed 8 of these, that from the Amazon to the Horn of Africa to the Mekong Delta, that would be replicated management-wise along the lines of the CBFP. So enough of the background. Helen, I have some of your details. I'm not going to talk about your personality. Helen was born into an agricultural community in central Kenya where animals were seen as something to be exploited rather than protected. But she went on to earn a bachelor's degree in zoology from Kenyatta University, a master's in science from the University of Nairobi, and a doctorate at the University of Leicester in ecology. She said that she drifted into ecology partly because she preferred to work outdoors than inside a laboratory. That's where the real work's done, boots on the ground. She became director of the Africa Center, supported by Wildlife Conservation Society. In 1998, she was appointed to a 5-person panel to advise President Bill Clinton on environmental issues in Africa. She joined the Africa Wildlife Foundation in February of 2001 as director of the Africa Heartlands Program, and the next year became the vice president of that program. In 2006, she received the Order of Great Warrior of Kenya Award, pretty prestigious, in recognition of her contribution to conservation. And in January of 2007, Helen was elected president of AWF by their board. I might mention she's also a member of the board of the Kenyan Wildlife Service. Helen, once again, we're very happy to have you with us.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am not sure where David has been reading from, but I didn't recognize a lot of myself in what he said. But thank you, David. Thank you very much. David has given you a bit of a background on how this program I'm going to talk about came about. It's exciting and interesting beginnings with Mike Fay, who I had the pleasure of working with when I worked at the Wildlife Conservation Society over 10 years ago now. But we all know Mike as someone with energy, someone who was determined and dedicated, and when he chose a cause, he went with it. So I'm not surprised that the Congo Basin Forest Program came about as a result of that commitment and energy. But for this afternoon, I really do want to just present, brief you on CARPE, and that's the Central African Regional Program for the Environment. And it's a program that was initiated by and funded by the U.S. government under the International Agency for International Development, USAID. And the presentation I'm going to give you is just going to cover and give you a flavor of some of the values of the Congo Basin, the field program that is currently under implementation, the partners who are undertaking the work, some of the achievements to date, the challenges that remain, and of course, the transformational gains that have been made so far, and how it is that the U.S. government and the partners who are working on the ground can sustain or make sure that these are sustained into the future. The Congo Basin is what is outlined there. It's a basin that's the second largest rainforest in the world after the Amazon, and it covers more than 1 million square kilometers of land. And we often refer to it as the lungs of the world because of its global climate mitigation value. And just to help put this into perspective for you, that's the same outline of the Congo Basin overlaid on a map of the United States. And you can see it's quite a large swath of land. In United States terms, it spans an area that would go from Ohio all the way to the Rocky Mountains. And this is an area that's covered by dense rainforest. So this gives you an impression about how large this area is. And of course, as you can expect for a forest of that size, it has got very, very many values and a great deal of importance for the world. It is the second largest contiguous tropical forest block in the world. It's 1/5 of the world's remaining closed canopy forest. It has the second largest river basin in Africa, and that is after the Nile Basin. It has 3 of the world's 4 large apes, great apes. Its endemic plants and animals are not yet fully quantified, but they exist in huge quantities. And a staggering statistic is that 60 million people are actually directly dependent on this forest in Africa. Besides those values, it obviously has some of the largest mineral deposits in Africa. It has some of the most valuable timber globally. And as I said earlier, It acts as one of the carbon sinks of the world. Therefore, for all of us sitting here in this room and beyond, it has inordinate value in as far as regulating global climate is concerned. And of course, beyond this, the 60 million people who depend on it for food, for energy, for water, let me say for their lives. So the typical dependency in Africa is high. In this area, it's even greater because of the significance of the resources that it has. The USAID CARPE program was conceived in 1995 and as a 20-year regional program, which was divided into 3 strategic phases. And the division into these phases was really determined and dependent on very much on the region, on the context, inaccessibility. And therefore, it was determined that it needed a fairly long time horizon in order to really develop and create outcomes that would last and that would secure this area. It had a scoping phase, a planning phase, and an implementation phase. I think more importantly, it demonstrated the commitment of the United States government basically to the region itself, but to many of the countries that are part of the forest basin. The overall objective at conception of this project was to reduce the rate of forest degradation and to also stem the biodiversity loss in the Congo Basin. Although Mike found that a lot of it was unsettled, there were also many areas that were fairly open. Many areas were suffering from slash and burn. And as war and insecurity grew in the area, many of the areas that had been unsettled suddenly became the new places where people could safely hide and exploit those resources. So what had seemed that a fairly unexploited forest suddenly came under great threat because of the insecurity in Central Africa. This map you see on the map shows the 12 landscapes that are marked, and these are the areas that were selected for intensive investments for field-level conservation and natural resource management work. And they were selected based on wildlife values, the biodiversity values, and the importance and some of the large mammal species that were to be found in that region. As David was talking earlier, he talked about other institutions that were involved with this project at conception. The African Wildlife Foundation, as I stand here, therefore, I am not speaking just for the African Wildlife Foundation, but for multiple international NGOs who have been partners in this program. And as I call them, I'd like their representatives to raise their hands up. Conservation International, thank you. Wildlife Conservation Society, the World Wildlife Fund. Okay. In addition to those partners, I also would like to mention that there were other CARPE's cross-cutting and U.S. agency partners, the University of Maryland, if there is anybody here. Thank you very much. The World Resources Institute. Nobody from there. U.S. Forestry Service. Thank you. NASA. They must be in space somewhere. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Richard, how are you? And these institutions have been providing extremely important technical and scientific support to the CARPE partnership. And they've been helping in tracking forest cover and monitoring wildlife species, and really making sure that the organizations that are working on the ground remain true to the mission and the objectives, which was to secure biodiversity and to make sure that the forest loss was stemmed. So these organizations have been holding us to the values and to the goals that we signed against. So what are some of the significant achievements that this program has achieved over the last decade? First, let me say that the CARPE partners have been working across all the 12 landscapes. We have worked with countless local, national, and international partners and have made substantial progress in meeting the program's objectives. What I might add is that, and mention as a really, really important consideration, is that we started at a very, very difficult point. We started with very low financial and human capacity, very low to no conservation infrastructure, very weak policy and legal context, serious logistical difficulties in accessing many sites, and serious insecurity in the number of them. AWF works in one of the sites that is really one of the most inaccessible sites. And it takes us a couple days to get to the field, and we fly there. We are on a canoe for 24 hours or sometimes longer than that. We then walk. We then have to ride on motorbikes or whatever is available to get us to the field. This is how remote some of these places are, and they require very committed individuals, very committed staff to be able to work into those places and realize some of the goals that we've set for ourselves. But it also indicates the value of some of the work that we're doing in those forests. Well, some of the results that have been achieved have included the brokering of a treaty to create the Central African Forest Commission, which is called the COMIFAC. And COMIFAC is a grouping of 10 countries within the region, and they usually have committed to conservation and to integrating conservation into their local development processes. But it serves as a very important organ, basically in which all the governments in the basin, they cooperate, they plan, and they share lessons, especially those lessons that are being generated from the work of CARPE in sustainably managing their forests and their wildlife resources. CARPE has also some very proud results from its program, and this has been the establishment and the strengthening of national park networks. Since 2013, 13 million acres have been formalized as national parks, an area twice the size of the state of Maryland. Many of these places are now the only places where wildlife numbers are growing, where wildlife populations are holding steady as a result of the security that is being provided. These areas are offering employment for local people. They're creating benefits for national governments. And in many ways, they're actually helping to transform lives and to transform areas. Especially some of these very remote areas suddenly have infrastructure, they suddenly have communication systems, they suddenly have jobs and positions that can take on local communities as employees. So apart from the work of conservation, they are also transforming lives. In addition, this program has also facilitated the certification of very, very significant areas of forest under the Forest Stewardship Council. And this is where forest concessions, which are run by private companies, get independently certified for certain criteria, environmental usually, social, and work-related standards for the staff they employ and the measures they take to make sure that these forests are being managed sustainably. Both WCS and WWF, who are represented here, have had particular expertise in this area. And they are developing best practice that is going to be used by logging industry to make sure that there is good management and proper utilization of the forestry resources. And it's interesting because what we are finding as early evidence from these places is that these forest concessions, when they are well managed, they protect wildlife and they create and protect forest products and ecosystem functions very much at par with what is happening in national parks. So they too have a huge contribution to make in the sustainability of these forests. David mentioned 5,000 guards trained. We are still hoping to get to that number, David. We are still at 1,200 of really good, well-trained guards. Many of these guards are the ones who are helping to work on the ground, to provide wildlife security, and to really make sure that we can stem poaching and reduce any illegal activities associated with the use of resources within these forests. And many are for commercial nature, and others are basically for consumption. But even when wildlife is consumed in large numbers, the impact is the same as poaching. You lose numbers, you lose populations, and eventually you may completely lose the populations. Health of these national parks are very much driven and dependent on these individuals. So a lot of what the program has to commit to is to equip these rangers. You have to commit to motivate them. You have to commit to make sure that they have what it takes to work in these very remote, difficult areas and to remain motivated enough that they can do their jobs well. And what is an important outcome is that data that we are collecting in the field actually shows that there is a positive correlation between the presence of guards on the ground and the safety of elephants in these places. And that is true of Congo. It is true of much of the rest of Africa, where you have presence of guards who are doing their security work properly. You also have less loss of your wildlife populations. And it's interesting here to note that the CARPE sites have not been losing elephants through illegal ivory, and that's a good thing for these countries. Also of importance is that the importance role of people has been recognized. And protected areas and forest concessions, we're finding cover less than 1/3 of that whole forest that I showed you. And therefore 60% is outside of our current reach. And it means that as partners in the working in these organizations, we have an imperative to work with local communities who live in these forests, who depend on these forests, and ultimately who are likely to destroy these forests if we cannot enhance their value to them, and thus make sure that we can help them develop alternative sources of livelihood so they are not mining these forests for their livelihoods. So we have a responsibility to reduce the dependency of these forests by the local communities. And let me also say that this program has been probably, let me go back and say kudos to the American government, because when they went to these sites, they were the lone voice. Although there were other voices saying this forest is important, really it was the American government that stepped to the plate and actually brought money to the table to help with the conservation program here. And although others had expressed interest, there was no money that came to the table in a timely fashion. But let me hasten to add that once the program started, the partners, the governments in this region have worked extremely hard to leverage enough resources to bring to this program. And over $72 million has been leveraged directly from EU governments, private foundations, and other donor partners. Just a few more examples in two case studies that illustrate a little bit of the array of what we've been doing. One is on livelihoods and livelihood integration. People always wonder why, when you talk about conservation in Africa, you always bring people into the equation. And it's because people's lives and their resources are intricately linked. And there is no way you can succeed protecting wildlife without dealing with human concerns. And so the main threats to these resources I've been talking about are human needs and the exploitation of these resources to secure those needs. One example, and this is the area where the African Wildlife Foundation has been working, we found a huge dependency of the resources by people in this region. And what we did was to look at how we could zone the whole landscape and to look at how we could allocate different parts of this system for different uses. So we looked at which areas were good for protection, which areas were already settled and already converted, which areas had the potential to act as forest areas for communities and where communities could have access to those forests. And what we ended up with was basically a mosaic of different land uses, out of which we were able to secure 2 national reserves, one in 2006, and another one was formally launched just last week. And both these parks have clear mandates for people to function and to use some of the resources in them. And out of an effort to work with people in that region, we have been able to secure 800,000 acres of forest, which have been zoned in areas adjacent to these protected areas. And out of what we've zoned of the 800,000 acres, 2/3 of that the communities agreed to leave as protected forest for themselves. They want to feel they own that forest, not protected for government, but protected for themselves and for their future use and the use of their children. And of course, 1/3 of that has been set aside as agroforestry and agricultural area. And what have we done with this community as a result of this microzoning? What we've done is looked at areas that have been eligible for managed use. And within that, we have agreed to work on agriculture intensification, where we've taken in with partners from the agriculture community, looked at improved seed varieties. We've looked at new farming techniques, including good conservation farming. We've looked at agriculture and what it requires and good governance. And through this program, we have been able to bring together agriculture production and improve it in a way that has removed the pressure and reduced the conversion of primary forest, and hence our ability to secure the 800,000 acres. We've also been able to set forest habitat aside and important corridors within that forest. In return, what we've done is then we have linked these communities to markets. What happened during the war is markets were disrupted, transport was disrupted, and with USAID support, they gave us a big boat. So we've been taking this boat upriver. Communities put their crops, they're taken to market, manufactured goods are brought to the hinterland, and the community is therefore able to begin trading and to generate income that's really important for them. But of course, for us, it's very important to have quid pro quo agreements, because people get wealthy, they can go back that 800,000 acres and begin to plow it. And what we've done is created those quid pro quo agreements so that honoring the conservation goals is part of what is an expectation as you receive support from the CARPE program. A second example is about protection, is about regional collaboration that has been grown out of the program of CARPE, and this is in the Sangha Tri-National Park. This is an area, a transboundary area that spans 3 countries: Cameroon, Central African Republic, and the Republic of Congo. And it's a really good case study for how you can bring governments together and create security and stability within a region using natural resources as a stepping stone for that kind of development. This region is rich in forest elephants. It has a lot of gorillas, and many of these species go across boundaries. And it therefore means that you cannot tackle issues at a national level. You have to tackle them at a regional level. And through the Sangha Tri-National Protected Area, and this is one of the places I believe Mike has spent quite a good amount of time, park rangers now meet and communicate regularly. They engage in joint border patrols. National leaders themselves meet to talk about conservation in this region because of its importance to the 3 countries. And what has happened is that the efforts of this Tri-National Park has brought together coordinated law enforcement, and it has seen poaching decline, and security in this border has been greatly enhanced. In the Sangha Reserve, which is one of the 3 reserves within this Tri-National Park, 1,000 weapons, 13,000 rounds of ammunition, and roughly 450,000 cable snares have been removed. And the result is that by last year, all elephant and gorilla poaching had stopped completely in this region. In Cameroon, again, is one of the 3 Tri-National Parks, the Lobaka National Park. 15 eco guards were trained in 2011. An immediate result 9 months later was that information provided, they were able to jail about 50 poachers, and the communities were mobilized to provide information on the poaching gangs, and they helped to dismantle 2 elephant poaching groups in that region. And eventually, the number of visitors in this area has grown, and they have been able, for the first time, to raise enough resources to cover park salaries for these national parks. Another of an example still from this area, and this is really to stress the value of stability and security in this region, and the importance of anti-poaching efforts in bringing that security. And what has happened in this region is that apart from improving the anti-poaching efforts, the security through the guards has established and brought about security and stability in this region. Poachers, as you now know, many of them are not going around with shotguns and spears. Many of them are well-organized, heavily armed militias, strong ties to powerful criminal groups. In Central Africa, I like to tell you how bad it is. These military groups travel thousands of miles and freely violate national sovereignty to harvest ivory and other high-value wildlife products for black markets, and they eventually are able to get money to finance these criminal gangs, and oftentimes they have become a challenge to national security. Just to give you an example, last quarter, a Sudanese gang in an area north of Cameroon and not part of the CARPE went into a national park called Bubajida, and they killed several hundred elephants within a space of 1 week. They hung around. There was no hurry. A lot of impunity for these gangs, and it actually took the Cameroonian military to actually get rid of this one gang, and it eventually involved the engagement of the U.S. military. But a similar event attempted in Sangha, which was one of the tri-national parks, found a ready group of agents funded by CARPE, and they were able to repel and to repulse such an invasion. And the examples really are saying to you, it's not just about wildlife protection, it's about security, it's about national security, and it's about stability within a region. Finally, as this program continues, what are some of our ongoing challenges? One, of course, as I said, the protected areas are not enough. They cover between 30 to 40% of what is required. We therefore need to go outside the boundaries of national parks. Capacity takes long to develop. Within 10 years, you cannot develop the capacity of institutions, of individuals to really undertake the work of such an enormous size and value to these societies. Financial self-sufficiency. We started off with low capacity of resources. We still have low capacity of resources, but growing. But certainly financial self-sufficiency has not been achieved by the agencies that are responsible for protected wildlife. And I think most importantly, there's a growing crisis. There's a growing threat. We suddenly are experiencing a resurgence in poaching, and I think many of you have heard about the growing events of poaching of elephants across Africa. And I think South Africa, and many of us have heard about South Africa and their struggle with rhino poaching. It is a world resource country. It has deployed its military. They have not been able to stop rhino poaching in their own countries. So it gives you an impression of how the lengths to which some of these criminal gangs are willing to go in order to get their contraband. And that means these challenges have to be addressed, and we have to continue dealing with them. But what's on the horizon? And if I may now catch us up on that. On the horizon, of course, we see a phase 3 of CARPE, which has been uncertain, but we believe that the U.S. government is thinking about finding the financing. It's the most important phase of this program. It's the implementation. It's the implementation phase. What was the third phase, and the phase of institutionalizing the gains that have been so far been made. And if you will, in summary, incredible groundwork and progress has been made in the last decade, particularly when we consider where we've come from. Phase 3 was always framed as an implementation phase, and a period when CARPE partners would lock in the gains made, support and handover activities to local organizations, including government, and really set the stage for a sustainable CARPE program. And having heard all that we've been done, I think you can agree with me that sustaining this program is essential not just to Central Africa, but to the world. To institutionalize gains, we need to make sure protected area authorities are able to take on the tasks of planning, executing, monitoring, and responding to some of these crises I've talked about. The frameworks for land use planning are established, and tremendous facilitation work has been completed. And of course, the next step means these have to be implemented, and communities have to be able to benefit and see the gains from that work. The COMIFAC itself and a lot of the countries within the region are keen to see CARPE continue its work. And finally, CARPE and its partners appreciate the concurrent activities and initiatives that are going on in government. And these include some of the work that is being done under the Global Climate Change Program, but also under Feed the Future. We hope that CARPE partners will be able to take on some of the skills that are new skills that are being leveraged, the new resources that are being leveraged from this. And the partners are excited by these prospects because what they mean is greater scope for engagement and for lasting transformational impact at the end of phase 3 of the project. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay. I know we're about exactly at 1:16 here, so people that need to go, you're welcome to. We try to keep everything on a running like the German railroad system here. So, and then we'll take questions and answers after if you need to go to a meeting or something.
There's one here.
Okay. Tim, and try to identify yourself. Tim Aiken from Jim Moran's office.
Thank you. Oh, hi. Real quick, looking forward, what do you view as your greatest challenge? Is it habitat loss, poaching, or is it something else in terms of sustaining your efforts?
I think it's both, because of course the impacts are very different, and some of the partners who are here can respond. Certainly with the sites we've been working, habitat loss has not been as big a problem, although the threats are there. But poaching for commercial reasons, there is offtakes for bushmeat. Some of those have been hugely threatening to this system. And remember, these are not, because they're rainforests, they're not as productive as your savanna system. So it means they're not able to regenerate the wildlife as quickly as other systems are able to. So I see that as the greatest threat, but you cannot generalize across the whole of the Congo Basin. Some places will suffer more from habitat loss, and others are obviously struggling much more with poaching. Yes.
Yes, thank you. Bill Millen, we were we met. So I was very intrigued. One of your slides showed, I think, 46 contracts signed with local communities, what were referred to as quid pro quo contracts. I think I know what that means, but I'd be curious if you could expand on that a little. What's the quid and what's the quo?
These communities, many of them had abandoned their farms and had spread into the forest because of the insecurity during the war. And really what they had been converted to is people who just moved around. They had no stable settlement. They slashed, they burned, and they moved on to the next place. And when we started the work in that region with the University of Maryland, we did a tracking of all the forest fires in the region and really saw that the threat was really, really large through this slash and burn. And what we did was to look at the zonation of historical use of that area, but also looking at the new information that we had on agroecological zonation. We were then able to define and designate areas that really made sense for agriculture, made sense for conservation, as strict protection and community protection. And what we did was to then go out and spread word in this very large forest to those communities who had wandered off from areas that we know they had resided in the past. And what he said is, come back to these regions. Would like to revive and reactivate agriculture. And what we then did was to provide the support for them to start to reinitiate agriculture in the area that had been zoned specifically for that use. And what we gave them were the seeds. We brought technical people who would help them with the farming. We then got the barge, which goes up and down with the private sector partners and buys their produce. We built storage facilities along the river where they could store their crop to enable them, keep them safe until the barges came up to collect them. In return for that support, we wanted forest, community forests that had been designated through the zonation scheme to be set aside and to be conserved for all the values that I've been talking about, for the ecosystem values, but also because we also believe that there is a revenue stream that can be generated from carbon assessments of these forests. So to them, we give money to initiate agriculture, to support agriculture, to help them find markets. In return, we're expecting that they will conserve these forests. So when those are signed, we are monitoring both. How much agriculture, we want to keep our promise on the economy, but we also want them to keep a promise on how much is going to be set aside as conservation area.
Okay, well, I think Helen and David will be staying a little bit for a few minutes afterwards, so you can ask some more questions. Thank you so much for coming, y'all.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day. Thanks, Helen. Boy, you deserve a cookie for being in these lights this entire time.
I know, right.
But it works well on film. That's really good.